Oh my God, they killed Kenny! Times have changed. Our kids are getting worse. They won't obey their parents. They just want to fart and curse. Should we blame the government or blame society? Or should we blame the images on TV?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of From the Queue. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find all of our social media links in the description below. Please leave a 4 or 5 star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please give a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. If you are on YouTube, my co-host, of course, is Brian. Brian, here tonight, we are doing something special for the first Tuesday or Wednesday of the month, depending on when this ever comes out. Brian, we're doing something very special. This is probably my favorite right match to date, as this is the Blame Canada edition, as our chosen match is a historic 10-man tag from what is generally regarded as one of the greatest wrestling pay-per-views of all time, the 1997 Canadian Stampede, as it was the Hart Foundation of Bret Hart, Owen Hart, the British Bulldog, Kim Neidhart, and Brian Pillman. They took on Stone Cold Steve Austin, Goldust, Ken Shamrock, and the Road Warriors, Animal, and Hawk. Our movie, South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. As part of the Real World, I did a 100 favorite movies of all time. This movie was indeed a part of that list. It is a personal favorite. The wrestling match that we are talking about includes 2 of my very favorite wrestlers. So, Brian, we are just celebrating all the things I like, I guess, this week.
Yeah, and this is birthday related. No, like your birthday is what? Officially June?
June the 7th, yes.
June the 7th. Okay, so happy birthday, and we're celebrating proper. And we both did extra credit. We're not gonna lie. We ended up watching the whole Canadian Stampede because it's 2 hours.
I mean, it's an hour and 48 minutes. It is literally shorter than every wrestling regular TV show except Rampage.
I know, and it flows so well, and they do less is more, and they kind of take advantage of the fact that their roster was shit at the time. Like, there was no Bariquas, there was no DOA, there was none of that. They limited who they took to Canada for the night, and they just booked around the 10-man tag practically. So, and no one even remembers the Blackjacks and the Godwins from that night because that was the pre-show.
I was just gonna say there was a dark match. I don't remember what the dark match was, but I believe that would have been on the Free for All pre-show.
Yeah, and that I had to look it up too because there's a very little known VHS that Coliseum Video put out of all the free-for-all matches, and I'm pretty sure this didn't want to make the cut either. So that goes to show you, not all.
What does that tell you?
Not all free-for-all matches are worth going out to see, folks. Except maybe I think the only one that sticks out is like Austin and Yokozuna. That was the only one that sticks out,
and that went like 2 minutes.
I know, but yeah, that's the only one I remember, and that was the only one that kind of stuck. But yeah, this is like a good flow. It's a good flow. I mean, we love Taka Michinoku. We love Great Sasuke. So that's obviously a great 10-minute match that was. And then, Triple H and Mankind. For some reason, I remember this differently. I thought that Mankind won this one, and then it was like 1-1, and then the blow-off was the cage match. But I guess they go beyond that because this was like a double countout that was like all over the building.
You forget, Brian, the blow-off was the return, or I guess the debut of Cactus Jack in WWF, defeating Hunter Hearst Helmsley in Madison Square Garden. That was the actual blow-off.
God, I keep forgetting about that too because I keep thinking Mankind is like, it was just separate. And it was weird too because Dude Love had a separate storyline with the Hart Foundation too. So right. Yeah, crazy summer for Mick Foley. Like, he got super over in this summer, and good for him. And his whole career changed because probably this feud and the fact that Dude Love kind of showed that other personality.
I mean, the interviews, the personality interviews.
Yeah. And Cactus Jack coming back was like the icing on the cake, I thought. So
yes.
And then Vader, we both love Vader. And Undertaker has, he could be great when he wants to be, but if he knows he's limited, he's not going to try. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's not going to go all out.
This was much better. The Royal Rumble match is not good. This one was so much better. It was very physical. It was very fast paced.
Yeah, I still can't believe that Taker gets him up for the tombstone. Like, it's such a visually crazy looking thing to this day, and I think it's one of those under the radar moments because I think we take Vader for granted, folks, a lot of the time. And for him to like put put himself in that position for Undertaker, and Undertaker can't even grab him around the whole thing. He's barely hanging on to the guy by his fucking ribs. Jesus, it was gnarly. But yeah, and Vader did 2 choke slams as well. Like, he took 2 choke slams, and when Vader takes a choke slam, he's putting it all on the line, folks.
Definitely makes a noise, that's for sure.
Yeah, and then of course the 10-man tag, and you love the heat, right? It's just, whoo.
I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, this is the audience is invested in who is going to win the match. They don't want to see great wrestling. They want to see the Hart Foundation win. Period. End of story. This is one of the better 10-man tags of all time. It is an absolute shame that they could not do this again as a War Games, because it would have been one of the best War Games of all time. Can you imagine Bret Hart in a War Games with, guys like the LOD who have done a ton of these? I mean, it would have been just unbelievable. It's an absolute shame that we did not and could not get that, but we got the next best thing. It's one of the most unformulaic tag team matches that the WWF has ever presented. There's not really like a heat segment like you get in a lot of tag matches. It's a lot of back and forth, the crowd reactions even beforehand, just the progressive ovations that each person gets as they come out on the Hart Foundation side is pretty remarkable. I mean, that almost makes the show worth watching by itself, is just seeing the visual and just everybody from Pillman to Neidhart. I don't know if you know this, Brian, but Jim Neidhart had his own theme song in 1997.
It's an offshoot variation. That's what I like to call it, because
it's like
Jim
NWOP theme.
It's like yeah, exactly. But like I mentioned last week, I think this is like the best Anvil's ever looked with that leather. I think the leather jacket just made him look like a badass, and leather jackets do work when you're trying to make a badass try to get him over. And I know it's not his in-ring best. That's probably like 85 to 91, but still, he looked like a star. And I think Anvil gets forgotten a lot of the time when it comes to the Hart Foundation. And I'm talking about the 5, not the tag team. But as a stable, I feel like people forget about him because he was past his prime. But in this match, it was like golden era Anvil coming back, because you mentioned they nailed the tag team. The demolition decapitator is but originally that was a Hart Foundation.
They hit that and did not hit the heart attack.
I don't know if Anvil could hold the guy, is my worry. That's because that was my thinking too. I wonder, did they just switch it up? And I don't know, maybe that was a deeper cut, because they did do that before. And the heart attack came when they turned babyface, and that's not a lot of thing that people realize. When they were heels, they were doing variations of the decapitator. Then they kind of gave it to Demolition, quote unquote. I feel like they kind of had this talk in the back, and they gave it to them because they kind of fit more Demolition than the Hearts.
Well, but remember, still, Jimmy Hart managed both teams, so it's possible that Jimmy Hart engineered a trade.
Something like that, yeah. I mean, because it was just kind of weird that you see some of these repeated double team moves, because we think that some certain teams are the innovators, right? But in certain cases, the Heart Attack is actually a ripoff of the Road Warriors, who did it in All Japan when they didn't even have the Doomsday device yet. So that's a little history for you people. Go back and watch their All Japan stuff. They're really experimenting. And then once they get to 87, 88, they kind of figured it out what their finisher is, and that became the Doomsday device. But there was all these different variations, and they all look like the Heart Attack, either from the middle rope or running off the ropes. But because Animal and Hawk, their size, it would just look devastating. And I noticed here too is they gave, I forgot who they gave, but they did the Doomsday device really early in the match, and I was like, wow, they're really going for it. And then to show you that they're really going for it, and this is kind of the Road Warriors' last grand stand, their last best match, or they're one of their last great matches. Hawk does a top rope splash from the top, and he nails it. I was thinking the whole time he's gonna miss, and every time I see this match, I think he's gonna miss, but he hits it clean, and it's wow, dude, he really felt the big time moment of the match, and they went for it. And even Animal looked like he was a little more juiced than normal. I'll just say that. But
well, you say that. I mean, juiced in the metaphorical sense, because they definitely look smaller than their Road Warrior days. That's for sure.
And what's crazy is that they look smaller by the end of the year. That's what I'm saying. If you notice that too, and I think,
which is amazing, because the drug tests were gotten rid of by this point. They had been gotten rid of in '96. So, but apparently
Yeah.
no juice for the Road Warriors. But yeah, this match is great, and there really isn't a whole lot else to say about it except for the fact that you just get a lot of really great moments. You get Steve Austin getting injured, Owen Hart getting injured, both of them coming back in their own distinctive ways. Owen Hart literally coming back to save his brother, getting the surprise roll up on Steve Austin for the 1-2-3. And I think from a logical standpoint, that was really the only finish that you could do, given the weird dynamics. Because the other thing that's unique about this entire period is that the Hart Foundations are the biggest baby faces in the world in this match. But if they go to Madison Square Garden, then it is a complete 180. Things would be very, very different. And it made for a very unique atmosphere throughout the spring and summer of 1997. As one week they would be in the United States and the Harts would be heels, and then they would be baby faces. And it's just fascinating that, anytime they also went international as well, the British Bulldog, of course, being huge in the UK, Bret Hart being huge everywhere in Europe, just about, especially Germany and Italy. It was a great time to be a fan. And in some ways, this is like the best period of the WWF as long as I've been a fan. Like, the Attitude Era had a lot of great moments, certainly, but like this week to week, I mean, it's probably the most compelling that the WWF has ever been, because it just felt like anything could happen. This was definitely when they were on the rise. They were not beating WCW in the ratings at this point, but the momentum really was starting to shift.
Yeah, I didn't watch this week to week live. When I was a kid, I was kind of like in this mode of like trying to find older stuff at the time. But we'll try to catch up on like Nitro and stuff. But recently, I watched a run of Raw on '97, and yeah, you're right. It's really like it really picks up after Mania 13. It's like the start of the Attitude Era, and this whole international thing with Bret. It just made sense because Bret was like the number one draw internationally, right, at the time for the WWF, and he was making them so much money internationally that he would have to come back when he had that he had like what 6-7 months off in '96, but they still had him come back to do the Italy shows and the Germany shows and the Kuwait shows, and that shows you that Bret Hart is a draw internationally, and I don't think people give him the credit that he deserves for that, because he was bringing in international money at a time when WWF obviously was not doing well domestically. But I mean, damn, they were taking advantage of this international market, and Bret was such a star all over the world because he's got that. It's different around the world, I guess. They kind of perceive him as more of a natural athlete, sports athlete, than an entertainer, and I guess that's why he clicked more with people than I guess a Hogan. Because Hogan was headlining in the '80s when they would go to like France, the England, like those WWF international VHSs or whatever. But if you look at the pops, like Bret was getting huge pops, and then when he got to that main event level, he was just like a big international star. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for maintaining that international hold. If Bret wasn't that international star, I don't know if WWE would be as popular around the world by this point. I think it would have been less. And I think that's very significant considering how '97 was very international inspired. We had a UK Raw that year, so just
it was the first year that they ever
Raw
did.
too.
You had a Raw in a Sky Dome, you had the Raw in the UK, and you also had a Raw, part of it from South Africa as well, that South African Raw has a pretty infamous reputation for being one of the worst Raws ever. But they were definitely experimenting more with going international because their business wasn't so good. And it is worth pointing out, in support of what you're saying, Brian, look at the year 1992, historically one of the worst years in terms of money attendance in the history of the WWF. Yet in that year, they drew their highest paid attendance. I'm not going to get into the WrestleMania 3 debate, but basically up until about WrestleMania 32, SummerSlam 1992 was the biggest gate in terms of attendance ever for the WWF. And the main event of that show was indeed Bret Hart versus the British Bulldog. And you have to give credit to both men. Obviously, the Bulldog being the hometown boy, but also all the credit to Bret Hart. And there's been a lot of discourse about that match, which you can all read in Bret Hart's book and read all about the Summer of Crack for the British Bulldog. But in this match, the 10-man tag, a great shining moment for the Harts. Just like you could almost play like the Stand By Me song and just go over what happened to each of the people in this match. And it's pretty crazy to think that just mere months later, Brian Pillman would be dead. Owen Hart, just a couple of years later, would die because of an accident. The British Bulldog would be dead just a couple of years later. Kim Neidhart would be dead a few years later. Bret Hart, all of his trials, tribulations, everything that Goldust has done with his demons and going to AEW and just having this extensive career that I don't think anybody could have seen coming. The tragedy of the Road Warriors, and both of them have since passed on. And Ken Shamrock, and what a strange journey he has been on. And Steve Austin being one of the biggest stars in the history of pro wrestling. But just a month after, basically, like in so many ways, him getting Tombstone My Own Heart cut his career way, way short. And it's really sad just to think this is like one of the final shining moments for so many people in this match.
Yeah, Pillman didn't have to do much either, and glad, because I think he knew his limitations, but he picked his spots well. But at least we got to see Brian Pillman smile, and to me, I don't know what it is, but I get really sentimental when I see him with like Stu and Helen, because he's kind of that adopted son. You know what I'm saying? Like he's kind of like, and we know he doesn't have like a good history with his father, right? Is that remember? And then not only that, it's like he's got father figures in his life, so I can't imagine his relationship with Stu and how much that meant to him. And I don't know if they really covered on the dark side of the ring that much, because they more focused on that Kelly guy. But man, I'm very fascinated with the whole like Pillman Hart Foundation thing, because I just keep thinking of like what ifs. It's like, what if he went to the WWF instead of the NWA, and how much that would have changed things for him in '89? And with that connection with the Hart Foundation, would you put him with a Jimmy Hart? Put him as there were so many things.
I mean, the thing is that he was always better off in WCW. I firmly believe that, even when he went to the WWF in '96, like WCW was always the better place for him. Obviously, when he got his new attitude and did his little shoot gimmick, obviously that was much more appropriate for where the WWF was going. But in terms of his body type and in terms of his intensity, he was always going to be better off in WCW, in my view. And really, you watch the matches with Goldust in August and September, and he's a complete, just a shell of his former self. And it's really sad, because he was an unbelievable performer for WCW, and great matches throughout the late 80s and into throughout the 1990s. But after the match, you mentioned Brian Pillman. One of the things that was really fascinating to me is, as they are going off the air, Martha Hart is walking out of the ring with a little OJ, and that is quite symbolic. Quite symbolic.
Why don't you explain that? Because I kind of missed the Owen Hart dark side of the ring, so you know more than I do.
So Martha Hart justifiably went after the WWE after the passing of her husband, and basically completely distanced herself from the company, distanced herself from the Harts, in fact, and distanced herself from wrestling, really until the Owen Hart tournament started in AEW a couple of years ago. Martha Hart completely distanced herself and her family away from it. And they won a rather large settlement from the WWF in the neighborhood of 8 or 9 figures. And they have put that money to use with the Owen Hart Foundation. And Martha Hart is a confirmed great parent, because neither of her children are involved in wrestling. In fact, OJ is an attorney. And I mean, just the amount of courage that she has shown in terms of acting and just going against Vince McMahon and going against the WWF is extremely admirable. And I don't know if you realize this, Brian, this is something that's amazing to me. There have been 3 different Hart wives who have written books. Can you believe that? 3 Hart family books written by the wives, Martha being one of them, Julie, Bret Hart's ex, and of course Diana. And the Diana tomes, the Laps fan has read from her tomes many times, and let me tell you, that book is something else.
I can only imagine. But I mean, look, they are a huge family. What, 9 brothers, few sisters, or whatever it is, whatever the numbers are. That leads to giant, lots of like mother-in-laws, brother-in-laws, that kind of thing. And it doesn't surprise me, considering it's a mostly male sibling family with a bunch of exes that probably are pissed off at him for their shenanigans in the wrestling business. Not surprising.
I mean, look at how many
all.
dead members of the family there are, including those brother-in-laws and whatnot. I mean, there's a lot to be said for what has happened, and you look at what has happened to, you look at the Teddy Hart situation as well, and it continues with the family, unfortunately. But it's remarkable to me that none of Bret Hart's kids ever became wrestlers. That is surprising to me. I definitely thought that there would be a 3rd generation Hart from his side.
Yeah, I mean, not really surprising. You know what I mean? It feels like, I don't know, like it's kind of relief for some of the newer generation members of the family of the Harts to not be wrestlers, considering they feel like it's a curse. We're kind of leaning into Von Erich kind of territory, but look, listen.
I mean, it's not as tragic, but there's a lot of tragedy.
Yeah, large families tend to have tragedies, and I know I hate to say that, but I know I'm part of a large family. There have been some tragedies in our family. It's just the higher odds for things to happen because the excessive numbers of family members. It's just a numerical mathematical thing, and and like I said, they have a huge family, so you're more open to these kind of tragedies just based on odds and nature. So. But that's one of those things when you have a huge family and decide to have 9 kids, like you got to prepare for what's coming in like 50 years down the line, because there's a lot of potential for that, but that's part of life. So, and then, well, I mean, I guess a month later, we get the debut of South Park on Comedy Central. And I know. It's very strange. I've kind of stopped watching South Park like
I've been
20 years ago, maybe? I don't know.
With The Simpsons, it's very much one of those things where, like, clearly the first 8 seasons are the best. South Park has had a lot more ebbs and flows. It's definitely had seasons where it's been good. It's definitely had seasons where it's been really bad. It is a very inconsistent show. The show for me is just I'm currently not watching it because the last couple seasons have not been very good at all, and I just don't think that they know how to react to a lot of the current events that are going on right now in a way that feels healthy and sincere. It's just not working. I just don't think that Trey Parker and Matt Stone are built for this moment, and it's unfortunate because it feels like this movie has a lot more to say in 2024 than maybe it did even in 1999. This movie, to me, is probably one of the best things that Trey and Matt have ever put together. And you also have to give a lot of credit to the person behind the music as well of this movie, because, anytime you do a movie with an animated show, there's going to be something unique. How do you justify this as a movie? And certainly South Park has had songs before. They would also put out a Christmas album in the same year, which would be transferred into an episode of television. But Mark Sherman also deserves a ton of credit for what he was able to do in putting together some amazing songs, one of which was nominated for an Academy Award. Brian, do you remember when Blame Canada got performed at the Academy Awards?
Yeah, I do. And it was just kind of crazy to me. It's like South Park was like, at the time when it was coming out, it was just this raunchy thing. And the Oscars and raunchiness just don't go together. You know what I'm saying? Especially in 99. So when this was like performed, I was just kind of like, Mom, do you know what this is? And she's asking me, like, have you seen this movie? And I kind of was like, yeah, I've kind of seen it, kind of whatever. I mean, she rented the movie for me. She didn't really pay attention. She trusted me as a kid not to just say those things out loud in public and just kind of watch some of those dirty kind of movies like a South Park at a young age. I was 10 years old at the time. I saw it on the VHS. It was crazy. But yeah, it was just crazy because I don't know. It was kind of like so weird in my head, and it's hard to explain because it was just such a weird contrast. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you wouldn't expect something like that, especially considering it was like this like cult kid show at the time that was getting bigger ratings as like the years go on. Because I remember being introduced to it at like a family party, and someone put it on at like it was like 8 o'clock or something or 9 o'clock, and it was Comedy Central, and it was the Barbara Streisand as Mecha Barbara Streisand, that episode, the kaiju thing, and I was just like, what the is this? You know, and then I watched the movie and I was like, this is great. And then, you know, the whole like Oscar thing, I was kind of thrown back by, because as a kid, the Oscars are just this symbolic thing of like artsy, great movies, those kind of movies that I didn't want to watch, kind of thing. And it was like, South Park's on here? Wow. So, and then I'm trying to figure what was nominated or what won this year. Oh, okay, so Tarzan won, right? And listen, I gotta admit, the better song is "You'll Be in My Heart." I think that's a banger for Phil Collins. But still, like, Blame Canada is like one of the most quotable songs, I think. Like, I don't know why, but for some reason I'll always remember it's not even a real country anyway. And I said that last week. And it just sticks out. And a lot of these songs just stick out a lot. And I don't know what it is, but I swear to God, like, I thought Alan Menken had something to do with this soundtrack. I had to make sure, just to make sure. And that's the vibe they were going for. And it's very, like, tricky, because, like, it very much tricks you into thinking these are, like, written as Disney songs. But then it turns the corner with the vulgarity, and it's like, oh, shit, this is, like, really ironic and funny. Like, I kind of akin this to, like, if you listen to Jack Black's band, Tenacious D, which is just him and another dude, but still, like, it's that kind of raunchiness mixed with actual creative structural music, if that makes sense. Because you don't expect good music with, like, raunchy lyrics, you know what I'm saying? So this kind of, like, is, like, this great contrast that brings both together, and I think that's what makes the soundtrack kind of timeless. To me, it's my favorite part of the movie. Like, I think some of the characters just don't hold up. Like, I'm not even sure if Mr. Garrison is like a great representation of a gay character anymore. I used to think that. I don't know anymore.
I mean, he's been on quite a journey. I don't want to get into his journey because I don't want to make it about that, but his character has definitely gone to a number of different places, and some of them absolutely, there are aspects of this movie that are extremely problematic. And I mean, just some of the language that is used. But I just want to point out for your benefit, Brian, that literally today, as we are recording this podcast, Pat McAfee called, now he did not do this in an insulting way, but he called Caitlin Clark a bitch. And I think it's pretty funny that this happens on the day that we are talking about South Park, a movie that contains a song about Cartman singing about Kyle's mom being a bitch.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. Caitlin Clark seems nice, but I don't know. Who knows? I don't
I mean,
know.
it's not, it wasn't like she's a bitch. It's kind of done in the more like sporting manner of it. Like, she's a bad bitch. I think that was the implication.
I hope so.
Like, just don't do it. Like, just don't call a woman a bitch ever. Just don't do it. Personally, professionally, in public, just don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've had some really close calls. I'll just say that, working at a really shitty hotel in a bad neighborhood. So I'll just say that. But man, like, Kyle's mom is really like Karen. She's a Karen, and it's just like so eye-opening now, because that wasn't a term then, and now it's like this, common term now, and just, oh man, like, who would have thunk that this movie's more relevant now than it was when it came out? No one would have bet on it, I don't think. But man, she is definitely a Karen, and like borderline MAGA, and she doesn't even realize it. And it's just such, I don't know. I wish Cartman killed her or something, man, because like, she's the most unlikable person, I feel like, and I just got in the.
It's meant to be very symbolic of a certain type of parent, and I don't think it's gotten any better. In fact, I would say it's even worse. I would say that this Karen-like character is all the more relevant because I think parents are only getting worse about blaming other people for their kids' problems by trying to ban books and trying to get teachers fired for teaching different kinds of material and shit like that. I mean, the sad thing is that this movie is more relevant in 2024 than it may have been even in 1999 because just the things that they're doing, the things that they're saying, again, some of the language is certainly problematic, but I think the overall thematic elements, the overall push of the movie, I think is still extremely relevant. And even blaming other countries, like trying to go to war to hide the fact that we can't deal with our own problems, that is literally happening right now.
I know it's fucking crazy, and God, it just reminds me of like January 6th, and just like the illogical thinking of what laws are and how to interpret certain laws, and we could just do certain things and just yeah, it's just wild, man. And I was blown away with the whole like rioting aspect of it compared to, like I said, January 6th, and it's just wow, because they were, if the January 6th protest, or storm, or insurrectionists, if you want to call them, like whatever, if they gotten further in their actions, they might have killed some people in office, like for real. Like it was, God, seriously, with the Terrence and Phillips stuff, it was just kind of like, wow, this is a little too real right now. But yeah, like I mentioned, like the soundtrack's the best part, I think. Satan, I think, is an underrated character. And I think he's always been an underrated character in the South Park universe, to be honest, because I guess from my interpretation, their interpretation of Satan is the one that's like the fallen angel type and not necessarily a devil. Like he's like a sympathetic character, which is like it's kind of a thing in some versions of Catholicism or Christianity or whatever, like different views on how Satan is viewed. He's still the devil, but how he got that way is kind of like different for some people. But it seems like they went with the more sympathetic approach, that he was kind of like a reject from hell or from heaven, and that, so to speak. So I've always been kind of fascinated with this interpretation of the devil because it's almost too sympathetic. And then they do the whole like Little Mermaid thing, which is like hilarious. Like I always just laugh my ass off because I'm just thinking like this is exactly the same. It's not the same song, Part of Your World from Little Mermaid, but it's like the same vibe. It's like I want to be on the surface level. I want to be with humans. That kind of thing. I'm tired of being with ghouls and demons in hell.
I mean, it's a trope of musicals to have the song of launch, right? And that's what that song is.
I know, and it's perfect. Like I feel like that's the height. That's the highest point of the movie for me, because I felt like that's the right kind of parody mixed with like the right amount of like satire. Oh man, that's my favorite part, honestly. And then Saddam Hussein. I mean, what can you say?
Aged well. I don't think it's aged well at all. His song is by far the worst. Oh, it's really bad.
Yeah, and I keep thinking like maybe they were big fans of Hot Shots 2. Have you seen Hot Shots 2?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe it's that version of Saddam that they're basing this off of, because that's the only other time we see Saddam being like really parodied in movies and TV, right? Is like that. From Hot Shots 2. If you ever seen it, folks,
I feel like
ridiculous.
Saddam was in another. I feel like he was in an episode of the show. I don't remember, but I feel like he was a part of the early seasons at some point. There was definitely a follow-up episode that took place in Hell with Satan and Saddam Hussein. I don't remember the episode well right now.
I
but
do remember that. That was like 2002-ish, I think.
There was definitely some follow-up to it, and yeah, this was just a very strange movie, but a really good one. A lot of laughs for 80 minutes, a lot of quotable lines. I'd spend 20 minutes doing that. I think that, yeah, the Saddam Hussein character doesn't work out too well. What are your feelings on the mole?
He gets eaten by dogs. I mean, what can you say? I don't know if that's supposed to be a caricature. I don't know. I mean, it's supposed to be the French spy gimmick, right? And we saw that at Godzilla. So I don't know if that was like, you know what I'm saying? Godzilla was the year before.
It's also a Les Mis reference.
I don't even know. It's just so strange because I feel like there's this archetype of that type of
character. Because I know that the one of the songs is definitely an homage to that. Just trying to think about if there's any other aspect, because there's definitely a lot of that. Here's a fun fact. Do you realize that Brett Spiner was Conan O'Brien?
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is like the crazy casting of it all. Like George Clooney's playing a doctor, but he's not playing George Clooney. And you would think that in a movie Attacking Hollywood, he would play George Clooney. And then Eric Idle's a voice too.
There are some really good cameos. So I just need. Obviously, we have Isaac Hayes. There is a Jerome in this movie. That is the chef's official name is Jerome. So I have to point that out. You have George Clooney as a doctor. You have Brett Spiner. Minnie Driver as Brooke Shields.
See, it's like, why didn't they just have Minnie Driver play Minnie Driver? But then it's like, I guess that's even funnier if she plays another known actress. So I'm kind of intrigued by this notion of actors playing different actors in animated movies. Does that make sense?
One of the funniest lines is, "I farted once on the set of Blue Lagoon." I laugh every time.
It's not the line. It's the silence afterward. That's the funny
part. You're not wrong. Mike Judge does Kenny's Goodbye, which is that's a funny moment.
If you know who Mike Judge is, it's kind of like a legacy casting at this point, because he's already almost a legend at this point, right? Like you're in the heyday of King of the Hill. He's past Beavis and Butthead. To a lot of people, he's kind of like an animation hero already in '99. So I'm just saying, like, I think that was good casting in terms of like honoring the past. Because I think there would be no there would be no South Park without Beavis and Butthead. If that makes sense to anybody.
I mean, I think there was definitely a time when animation was not a big deal. The Simpsons definitely brought it more into the mainstream. And quite honestly, when you get South Park, then you get another run. You get basically Family Guy as a fallout of that. King of the Hill is to an extent as well. So in '97, you really get this whole next generation of animated comedies. And a lot of those comedies are still on the air. South Park's still on the air. King of the Hill reboot coming soon. Futurama's been rebooted a number of times. So these animated shows have a very, very long tail. And South Park, I have to imagine there are over 250 episodes at this point. But surprisingly, there has never been a sequel. I know that there's been a lot of conversation about sequels. Imagination Land apparently was going to be a movie at one point, but it became a 4-part part of the series, which is probably one of the best things that they've ever done. I know you're.
That's my favorite. It's my favorite, and it had nothing to do with me being on shrooms that night because it was Halloween. I think the last episode on Halloween, 2007, wasn't it? Like I'm not making this up.
You're probably right.
Because I remember after we watched it at my buddy's place, we put on, I think it was Jimmy Kimmel, and he was dressed as like Count Chocula, and then seeing that on fucking shrooms was just like, that was even crazier than what I just saw in Imagination Land for some reason. It was just Jimmy Kimmel as Count Chocula. But yeah, it's just, for me, I think the creativity behind that whole concept was just out of this world, and you can stretch it out with so many different characters and so many parodies of different characters kind of thing, and making fun of all these different characters. And it's Imagination Land, so you can just come up with anything. But I think what really intrigued me about the notion when I found out afterward that it was supposed to be a movie is that it doesn't have like a Disney sing-along type soundtrack like this. It's just 4 episodes. So I was wondering, like, if they did ever was the plan to release it as a movie, was it not going to have the soundtrack like this does and be very different and take a different approach? Because The Simpsons just went and did like straight through it, hardly any music at all. I don't even think there was like any musical numbers in the Simpsons movie. So I was kind of intrigued.
Which is really strange because The Simpsons, of course, has done multiple episodes with a lot of songs, but I know that is very much a byproduct of the first few seasons. They have definitely tapered off in terms of doing good songs, but yeah, I would agree that it's amazing to me that they really did not have a big musical number in the Simpsons movie, given their reputation.
Yeah, that's kind of always been what stuck out with me. You know what I'm saying? Because, I mean, listen, if you're a big fan of animation like we are, you'll notice like trends and stuff like that. Like the reason this movie sticks out, like I said, is because of the soundtrack. You hardly get any of that in any of the South Park episodes, unless it's the Christmas season or like some special episode or something, and you only get like one song. But in this case, it was a whole bunch of great original songs, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for the writing of the songs too, which kind of connects to like the success of Book of Mormon, right? I'm sure, like I've not heard the soundtrack yet, but I've always wanted to watch the show. But I kept telling myself, why don't they make a movie out of this? And I forget who I had the conversation with, and they just told me the most blatantly obvious thing that I should have realized. If they make a movie out of it, they're not going to make any money off the musical anymore. Boom. There you go.
Well, at this point, they have made so much money off the musical. It's very surprising to me that they would not. And I don't know. I feel like, given the success of Hamilton on Disney Plus, I still feel like people are going to see Hamilton across the country regardless. If people want to see the show, they're going to see the show. And I at this point, given we are years away from it, I am surprised that we have not had a Book of Mormon musical in theaters. I mean, musicals are tough. I think that's the other part of it, is musicals typically don't do very well. But that one has been so successful, I'm pretty surprised. Any other thoughts? Go ahead.
One more thing. I just wanted to say, like, I even thought, like, maybe they could do a Fandango couple shows only of, like, a live performance, because they do that for operas all the time. And still, like, it's nothing. I guess they really are protective of it, and I get it. It's like protecting your baby, and you want to just milk that cow as much as you can for the live audience crowd. So there you go. Final thoughts, 8 out of 10. I think it's a classic in terms of, like, musicals. Like, I think it's one of the top musicals of all time. I know that sounds crazy, but I think it's less the comedy and the raunchiness, but just the fact that you combine the raunchiness with creative musical writing. I think that's always, it's a tough challenge, but when you can pull it off so well, like I said, it just sounds like it was stuff written by Alan Menken, but it wasn't, and I think that's the point of it all. And very well done. Some of the characters I just don't really hold over for me. I think the only people I'm rooting for left in this show are Stan and Kyle. But even then, it's like Stan has his moments where he's just not rooting for him. And then at this point, the way they booked Stan's dad, it's like he's the most unlikable person in the world. So I don't know, man. But that's all.
Stan has had an inexplicable run. Randy Marsh has had a ton of storylines, and I generally don't like them very much. Look, to me, the series finale of this show should have been Getting Old. Have you ever seen Getting Old?
Okay, I heard about that one. Is that the one where it's like a time travel thing, and they see Carbon to become a good person in the future?
No, this is. I need to send you the link for it. You need to watch Getting Old, because it should have been the series finale. And
what year was it?
It is. Oh, this was, my God, it was 10 years ago at this point.
Then that sounds exactly how that sounds about right then.
It was not a time travel episode, though. There are very specific reasons why it is generally regarded as the should have been series finale of the show. And maybe at some point we can discuss it, but not right now. But very exciting stuff. Yeah, I mean, this movie is one of my favorites. I think it's hilarious, and I still think it mostly holds up. Again, it's certainly not perfect, but for a movie that came out in 1999 to feel as relevant in so many ways is pretty shocking. Brian, anything else before we talk about what we're doing next week?
I just wanted to mention that Dave Foley was the voice of all the Baldwin brothers. So yeah, that's another one of those weird castings.
It's really funny. Michael McDonald was the voice of Satan's High Notes.
Get out of here! The real Michael McDonald?
Apparently.
Oh my God, I'm a fan. You don't have no idea how much 80s top 40 I've been listening to with that guy coming on. Yeah,
I can only imagine. I mean,
with him and James Ingram. Yeah, I know.
He is a huge part of it. All right, Brian, what are we doing next week?
Well, we had to pick out 2 movies for the month that kind of fit the anniversary gimmick, and I kind of looked it up, and was looking at the box offices. June of '94 is very interesting, considering that we're going to go back to that later on in the summer for some of the baseball movies, because '94 was a big year for baseball movies as well, considering there was a strike that year too. But the anniversary next week that we're going to celebrate is something special to me. Lion King. I remember being in the theater as a 6-year-old and just being transformed, and that was the first time I felt like, I don't know, like a movie is beyond something that, I don't know, something special, way beyond anything I'd ever seen. That was like, it felt even more special when I watched Star Wars the first time. But I saw Star Wars on VHS, and I saw this in a theater with great sound. It's 90s theaters, folks. It's not like THX sound yet, but still, like, the soundtrack was bumping. I was in Northridge, California. It impacted my life to the point where I didn't even realize it till, I don't know, maybe like 15 years ago, when I say the phrase "no worries" a lot, and I never knew where I got it from or whatever. I'll put it in chats, texts, or whatever. I got it from Lion King. It means no worries for the rest of your days, right? That's Hakuna Matata. And
I am
been doing
so
it since
excited
Cubs.
I'm so excited for anniversaries because I want to go over what we're going to be doing a little bit over the summer. So you mentioned the Lion King, which is next week. We will. So obviously we did the 25th anniversary of South Park. I am so excited. The 30th anniversary of Speed, the 40th anniversary of Amadeus. I am stunned that Brian has also seen this movie. This is probably the one I'm most excited to talk about because Amadeus is incredible.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned it before how like the one actor that plays Salieri, I feel like because I did like a little joke about Salieri when we did the review for Moon Knight. I forget his name, Abraham or whatever it is. He's in that as well.
F.
So
Murray
yeah,
Abraham.
F. Murray Abraham. And yeah, I just always remember him being this asshole of Salieri. And I remember we read the book in literature class first. And I remember my exact words from my teacher. He's all like, "Okay, this is one of the few times where the movie is way better than the book, and the book is actually a play, like with like music cues and shit like that, because I guess it was originally a play, but like it's so much better as a movie." And I was like, "Wow, this is way better than the book." And the set pieces are amazing, the acting's amazing, and considering it's the guy from Animal House, which I'm a big fan of. But just the way he plays it, Amadeus is like this kid-like character, and how Salieri is just so obsessed with him because he's just jealous of his talent. It's a great movie. I know it's like it's kind of been forgotten over the years. So is Milos Forman, I feel, but man, it's one of my
Milos
favorites of the
Forman
80s.
will be a huge part of our summers. We will be discussing one of his other big anniversary movies a little bit later on in the summer. We've got a fully themed. We got a bit of a America theme going on in July. I'm really excited for this. I'm not going to spoil anything. And then August, Brian, I don't know. We have to talk about Jim Carrey because Jim Carrey's 1994 alone is a really big deal. But he also has significant movies in 1999 for the two of us, as well as 2004.
Yeah, and I was actually in the theater. What you're talking about? Eternal Sunshine? Was that 2004?
That is 2004, the
Wow, for
20th
some reason I thought it
anniversary.
was
That will be
2003 as well. I don't know, but yeah, I
Nope,
remember being in the theater for that
that's
one, man.
huge.
Yeah. And I was like in my independent movie phase at the time too. So that really kind of reflects that time period because that's kind of one of the most known independent flicks that kind of clicks with a regular audience. And still to this day, man, that movie's like there's so many details in that movie. I swear to God, Michael Gondry, man, I felt like he as a director that kind of got lost in the shuffle as well because he was too into his own
Definitely.
art, if that makes sense. Because I've seen some other movies of his that don't really
No,
like
he really
have
is.
endings. So yeah.
Big summer of anniversaries for Brian. I am Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.